welcome. This will be, hopefully, the first in a series that we're calling Show and Tell Their Story, where we take a particular item from someone's collection and tell the story behind it. And today, I'm honored to have as the first guest, my father. And why don't you go ahead and tell him a little about yourself, Dad?
Hi, my name's Tom Lamont. I was in the Illinois Army National Guard for some 25 years, retired as a full colonel, and then was fortunate enough to become the Assistant Secretary of the Army and sent out the Pentagon for 5 or 6 years, did that, and then later became a member of the Congressional Committee on the Future of the Army Commission, which was designed to figure out our future threats and our capabilities. We had to address those threats.
And so we appreciate all your efforts on that behalf. We know you did a lot of good work for some good folks out there. So we thank you for that. Now today, what do you have? You have a pistol that my grandfather had brought back. Can you tell us anything about that one?
Yes. From all the stories that my father told, he was a member of General Patton's 3rd Armored Division in World War II. And ended up, of course, going into the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944 over the Christmas holiday season, and spent a number of weeks thereafter as the Germans were retreating. And in that retreatment, of course, they took any number of prisoners, and as they asked the prisoners who were readily surrendering, they had had enough of the war, to relieve themselves of their weapons. And so then my father acquired this weapon. I knew nothing about it growing up other than there was a weapon in Dad's dresser drawer. We were hunters, but we rarely ever had occasion to shoot handguns. So I used this handgun growing up in the early 50s, and not that far beyond the World War II. We were full of all the stories from World War II. So we played our either cowboys and Indians, or we played Army. And since I didn't have a lot of things to play with, when he wasn't around, I would get in there, and this would be my gun to play Army.
And that would account for some of the condition issues.
I'm sure it does. But on rare occasions, my dad, upon my request and my brother's request, he took us out to fire it. So I have fired the weapon 2 or 3 different times. It's a .32 automatic, small. Actually, it'd be a great concealed carry weapon now, but my father did carry it throughout the remainder of the war. And after many years, I, for whatever reason, showed son Mike, who is far more interested in the research and background of these types of weapons than I am.
So, of course, this wasn't just any pistol. This is the Sauer Son's 38H, which has an external safety and decocker and is double single action pistol. This was a interesting double eagle 37 stamped variation, and in addition it has a Sauer Son's magazine, original magazine in there, and also it has a what I believe is a late war holster made out of pigskin.
Yes.
And still has the Army style belt attachment where Grandpa was wearing it around with him.
The hook on the right, yeah. The hook on the side. He carried it throughout the war and returned home after the war was over in roughly June or July of 1945. And of course, as we moved on and I became involved in the military, we shot the Colt 45 and we shot the Beretta 9mm. In fact, I own my own 9mm, Sig Sauer 9mm.
Well, and while we're talking, I never thought about the fact that you have the Sig 226, which this is the predecessor for. That's kind of cool. That's something I never thought about.
And I can't believe I didn't realize that, because I bought my Sig Sauer on my own after I left the Guard for my personal protection and fun. And then I never recognized or even cared to even look. I had no idea they were relatives of this.
And before, of course, this was J.P. Sauer and Sons. This wasn't yet Sig Sauer, but it was what would become what's known as today as Sig Sauer.
It actually has a great feel to it. I'm used to a much larger grip on my 226, but this has a very comfortable grip. And now I'm sorry we haven't fired this. I don't know that Michael's ever fired it.
I never have.
And I haven't fired it in at least 25, 30 years, but I'm kind of anxious to do that now if he tells me if it's in the condition that we can do this.
Well, of course, we have to replace a couple springs in there, but once we do that, it should shoot just fine, and I would have no issues firing that, taking that to our next range day.
I think it'd be fun.
Now, this is called Show and Tell Their Story, and the whole point of this series is, well, there's an old saying in firearms collecting, buy the gun, not the story. And this gives us a chance to tell the story of the person that we know who originally owned this. Well, not originally, but how it came into our possession. And so is there anything else you can tell us about Grandpa, and did he keep in touch with any of his buddies?
Well, I don't know that. Typically, those of that generation from World War II rarely spoke about their experiences. As I said, he was in Patton's 3rd Armored Division. He was on a tank, and of course went all the way through France to Belgium, into early Germany before he rotated to the back, but rarely ever spoke about his experiences other than to tell us the funny stories of how they liberated a number of vineyards and wine cellars, and to the extent that as they moved on, because he wasn't a particular big fan of General Patton, because he thought they pushed them too far and they'd run out of gas, out of fuel for their tank, and they felt they were sitting ducks sometimes since they couldn't maneuver. But he did tell a story of they acquired a motorcycle, and one of them drove the motorcycle along with them, a German motorcycle, and after they had liberated this wine cellar, each day they sent the motorcycle guy back to acquire a few more refreshments to keep them moving, to the extent till they got about 60 miles away, and it was getting a little too rough to do that. The only other story I can tell you about is the donut dollies. He really had a problem. I don't know if it was the Red Cross or whoever sponsored the donut dollies, but he said one day they were able to acquire a Jeep, and they drove some 70-some miles to get coffee and fresh donuts. And when they got there, they were either out or they couldn't get them for some reason, and the rest of his life he carried this grudge against the donut dollies, which I'm sorry to say. I'd like to believe that was just a coincidence that they might have been out, but it was such a disappointment to have such a minor thing like that. And as I said, I had the opportunity to be in Iraq and Afghanistan as Assistant Secretary of the Army during the war years. And this was in I went in 2009, and so I know what those small little issues can mean to someone, and that it will stick with them forever. And it certainly did stick with my father.
It sure did, and I still remember that till this day.
It was something that just happened, and I'm sure some of you whose fathers or grandfathers participated in World War II will have those similar kind of stories.
And this kind of thing is so important to me because, you were nice enough to let me take possession of this pistol, and it's the stories that don't stick with it. If we don't capture this kind of thing, it tends to get lost in history forever, and those are really important in terms of how this came to be and just in general history of our family. Yes. And history of our country.
I was privileged to have attended 6 different Medal of Honor ceremonies in the White House, and those ceremonies including one World War II veteran, of course, posthumously, Korean War veteran, 2 Korean War veterans posthumously. The first 3 Medal of Honor award ceremonies for Iraq and one for Afghanistan. I was very privileged to attend, and I can assure you how moving those ceremonies are. 2 were posthumously with their families there, as well as their survivors of their unit. I can assure you how that hits home when you observe one of these ceremonies. They're extremely moving. So I can't say enough for how privileged I was to serve in that capacity. I enjoyed my role with the Illinois Army National Guard, but when you get to the Pentagon, it's a whole different world. And I pinned my share of Purple Hearts on some poor young men in Germany as they came off the battlefield. And unfortunately, I had the privilege of attending a return of several deceased at Dover, Delaware, and that's where they all returned. And while the family's there, I marched out, and we did march. And even though I was not in uniform, we marched out as the caskets were removed and brought in, and it will just tear you up to watch one of these things. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place, and including mine. And I was not embarrassed for what these young men and women had done. I was so privileged to have been a part of it, and I know I'm getting off the track of this weapon story, but I just want to say to you and those of your peers and ancestors and brothers and sisters and fathers who have had the distinction and honor and truly a privilege of serving this great country, we thank you all for your service. And Army, Airmen, Naval, Marines, Coasties, you've all done your share, and we really appreciate what you've done for all of us.
And that doesn't get off topic at all. Actually, it ties everything together. We talk about the individual owners of a piece, and we tend to think about that person serving and the things that they went through. But what's easy to forget is about their family and how much that affects every member of their family.
We always said a soldier doesn't go to war, the family goes to war. And in my capacity as Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, on more than one occasion, of course, I had to meet with families, particularly have to hear from the wives and mothers who have seen their husbands and sons and daughters on second, third, fourth deployments. And they said, you know, my kids, as one wife said, they need their father. He's been gone 4 of the last 6 years. And it just tears you up to see what's happening with some of this folks and how much they go through, all the families, to serve this country. And on more than one occasion, and of course so many of the meet and greets, we have our challenge coins, and I had a very nice coin. I coined probably as many wives and mothers as I did of soldiers, because they earned that coin for what they did to keep the home front going and keep their spouses stable as it was, and secure and remotely happy as they could be in their deployments.
Now, what was Grandpa doing at the time in the early 40s there? What was he doing before he shipped out?
Well, Dad was the first college graduate in our family, but he was an ag teacher. We grew up in southern Illinois, and I mean deep southern Illinois, probably about 60 miles from the Kentucky border. And he went back to teach school. And so his first year of the war, he was not drafted because they decided ag teachers were responsible for growing new farmers to feed our country. But of course, as the war progressed, and I think he felt he needed to be a participant in it, and as it worked out, he was then drafted into the Army in late, sometimes in 1943. Did his boot camp down in Fort Knox, Kentucky, which at that time was the home of the armor. It has now moved to what was known as Fort Hood, Texas. But he was an ag teacher. He had a young son. My brother was born in 1942, right before he went into the service. I was born in 1947, so he had to wait till he got back for me. But no, he was an ag teacher. And then all his life he was involved in the agricultural community one way or another. It was always interesting because if he was ever around a brother or a brother-in-law, all of whom served, or a neighbor, from time to time, I would hear elements of other stories of what some of these others went through. Which were not exactly the same kind of funny experiences that my dad reflected on. But they would communicate among themselves about some of the things they went through. And while I didn't hear all the stories, I heard enough to know their stories among each other were a lot more explicit and descriptive as what they talked about with us.
Well, I know he enjoyed getting together and playing some card games with the neighbors across the street, and I know he occasionally would reminisce about some things.
Oh yeah, I had to be the 10, 12, 14-year-old bartender for some of the poker games, and remember the highballs? That's all I knew how to fix was a highball, a little bit of bourbon, and a little bit of 7-Up or whatever they did, which was fun. But otherwise, as I said, they spoke very little of their experiences, at least to the rest of us.
That's part of the reason that I wanted to do a little something personally about this item, was because I remember Grandpa very fondly. I spent a lot of time there, and I had some great memories with him. But you remember pieces that I wasn't old enough to remember, or I wasn't born yet. And although this isn't his entire story, this is a piece of his story that relates to a physical object that we have now, and it gives us a chance to reflect back and remember him specifically and some of the things that he did.
Well, and let me tell you one more thing about other items he brought back, which was not very many, but he did bring back a German bayonet.
That's right, you still have that.
Which one thing we still have. And I remember he brought back a German uniform. And it was very clean and all that. So I don't know if he found a clean uniform or what. He brought it back. And the only other thing that he brought back that I can recall was a French helmet. And this was a helmet that was rounded, but it had a bar down the middle of it because it was so unusual. And the way I remember it is I wore it in a Halloween parade once, not knowing what it was, along with his old Army wool overcoat. That's the only other thing he brought back of his uniform was his Army wool overcoat, because they probably didn't have one at home. But other than that, and to my everlasting regret, when they later moved in life, they threw it all away. The only thing we have now is the bayonet and this pistol. Everything else was tossed, and I'm so regretful. I would love to have, because there were some what they call V-mail letters. V-mail was a precursor to, I would say, faxes now, where relatives or at least spouses were able to communicate with their family members. In my case, my father, and it was like a photograph of a letter. All I can recall, and having read one, which of course was later thrown away, was my mother asking my father, now that the war is over, do you think you will be sent to the Pacific? As I'm sure everybody was thinking about that in May of 1945, before when our war with Germany was over, but the Pacific War was still ongoing. And those worries, I'm sure every relative and spouse and mother went through, would their sons and husbands and daughters be sent to the Pacific? And as I say, I'm very regretful that all those things have been tossed and we don't have them. So my encouragement to those of you who are watching this video, one, get the historical background from Dad or Grandpa or Uncle Joe or whoever you've got, and see what they have. Because everyone, says, well, we might have a pistol or a bayonet or something, but they may have lots of other artifacts, as I say, in terms of clothing, in terms of letters, of postcards, medals. I've heard so many people say, we never knew Dad got a medal till he died, and we found it in his trunk. So it might behoove those of you who are watching is start asking those questions now. It doesn't have to be World War II. It can be Korea. It can be Vietnam, as I know we're all aging. Now we have Iraq and Afghanistan. So I encourage all of you out there to try to find out this historical background and record it for history.
It's a great reason to talk about Grandpa, or in this case, gives us a chance to tell the story of Edward Elmo Lamont. If we can talk about Grandpa and, keep his memory alive here with us today. And that's going to do it for our first episode in the Show and Tell Their Story series. If you like this kind of thing, if you want to know more about some individuals and the items that tell their story, let us know. We'd love to hear about it. And Dad, I'm happy to have you as the first person on this channel and this series, so thanks for coming.
Well, I enjoy it, and I'm very privileged to be asked to do this.
Anything else? Any other pieces you want to throw in there?
No.
I can just chop this.
We've probably bored him enough.
Think we're good?
Cool.